Shalom and welcome to the Heartland Connection. This is Zach Waller, the Executive Director of Hayuvel, your host, coming to you guys straight from the Heartland of Israel. It's been a really big week this week. We were able to celebrate the feast of Shavuot in Jerusalem, the Holy City, and it really was an incredible experience. We were able to be there with our whole group for the Recognized Jerusalem trip, and it was really an amazing group of people that we had here. Some that had been with us several times before, some that were brand new to the Israel thing, first trip to Israel, and the whole group was just really able to experience a lot while they were here. With just so much going on with the U.S. Embassy being moved to Jerusalem, and then celebrating Jerusalem Day and Shavuot during the 70th year anniversary of Israel's rebirth and re-independence. And during Shavuot, we were able to do a study through the night, and then in the morning, make our way to the Kotel, to the Western Wall, for the morning prayer service. And it was really incredible. Like, we went from the hotel out, and we got to Jaffa Street, like where the tram usually is, like the train that runs through Jerusalem. The whole road was like packed full of people walking to the Kotel. And then when we got to the Kotel, it was the whole Western Wall Plaza was just like totally packed out. Which, like 2 years ago, when I went to the Kotel for the same sort of thing, for that morning prayer service, it's like 4:30, 5 a.m. And 2 years ago when I was there was like maybe 4 or 5 small groups up in that upper section of the Western Wall Plaza, and the bottom section I think was pretty full. And last year when we went, the upper section was about maybe half full. This year when we went, like the whole thing was like totally packed out, hardly enough room to move. And so it was just really incredible to see so many people coming to pray, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I think, I was listening to a rabbi and a member of Knesset, Yehuda Glick, and he was talking about how, with the embassy move and with all these things going on, that the left wing and media outlets are having a difficult time understanding. And they said the main thing that they were saying is, now, why is God being mentioned so much? And Rabbi Yehuda Glick said, I have some news for you. It's all about God. God is the one doing all these things. And it's just so difficult, obviously, for people who maybe don't acknowledge God so much. But that was what was really powerful to me, was all those people who are coming to pray at the Western Wall are all recognizing God. They're recognizing that the things are happening because of God and what He's doing in our world. So that's really the feel right now, I feel, in Israel, is like the recognition of God, that, of His existence and in His work every day in our lives, and especially in Israel right now, is just being recognized. And it's a powerful thing. God can do so many big miracles, but if we don't recognize it, it's Him. There's only so far that it can go. But when people recognize, oh yeah, God is doing this, and then choose to believe in Him and serve Him, that's what we're aiming for, what we're working towards. So it's such a blessing to see that people are waking up to that realization. So earlier this week, we sent off our Recognized Jerusalem trip tourists, everybody that came in. Like I said, it was an amazing group, and really, really had some amazing experiences. And now we're gearing up for the summer trip and harvest. It's coming up really soon. If you haven't got your applications in for that yet, I strongly encourage you to come. And as God is working this amazing restoration in the land, that we would be able to join Him in this work that He's doing. So I invite you to come. It's going to be an amazing harvest season. The clusters are beginning to form and develop grapes in the vine right now. It looks like it's going to be an amazing harvest. So get in your application and come join us. We've got a spot for you here on the Mount of Blessing. So this week's Torah portion is Nasso, which means lift up, literally. But in this, the way it's worded in this sentence, it means take a census. It's like lift up the head. So it's like you're counting each person. And we are in Numbers chapter 4, verse 21 through chapter 7, verse 89. And And the portion starts out talking about the Gershonites, the Merarites, and their responsibilities as Levites in the tabernacle. And then we have a couple of rulings that the portion goes into. We have laws about purification, about certain kinds of theft, and we have this section about a wayward wife. And then we have a whole section on a Nazirite. And, I would say probably if we did a poll or went through all the Torah portions and picked out the one rulings that are the most interesting or the most awkward or the most unable to understand. This one about the wayward wife is probably one of those top ranking commandments. It's like, okay, what exactly is going on here, and what's this whole deal? And it kind of makes it a little bit uncomfortable, especially Western culture, who's with all of the feminism and stuff, and for people who are trying to obviously respect women, and this looks a little strange. Like, okay, what's going on with this? But I think it's really important for us, and actually this is the section I want to kind of zone in on a little bit, because it's obviously tempting to just kind of put it off to the side and say, hey, this makes us uncomfortable, let's don't talk about it. But I don't know about all of you, but lately I've seen just a huge attack on marriages. It seems like over the last year or two, strong couples, godly couples with lots of children. Seems like the enemy has just really went in and caused havoc, and there's divorces happening and people having a really difficult time in their marriages. So I think, we really need to take these scriptures and see what God's talking about here. What is this thing all about? How do we understand it? How do we apply it to our lives? What's going on here? What does God think about marriage? And these scriptures give us some insight, I believe. And so I think we need to dig into it. We need to discuss it, no matter how uncomfortable it is, no matter how much it may go against our mindset or our culture. This is the Word of God, and we need to accept it and figure out, how to apply it, how to live out what God's called us to, and find His blessing in that. God's Word and His will is for blessing. He wants us to have beautiful marriages, wonderful marriages where there's love and respect and all these things that are needed. And so I want to dig into this a little bit. So the basic deal here seems like is that when a man and his wife, when it seems like there's a possibility that the wife has committed adultery, then the man takes his wife, they go to the Kohen, and the Kohen puts water into a cup, puts dirt into it. The woman's head covering is removed, and this is the only time in the Torah actually that head covering is mentioned, which head covering has become a tradition and a custom that the Jewish people take on for all married women. And it's something that my family has also taken on. I believe it's a part of modesty. And so this reference right here is the only reference you can actually find in the Torah that talks about a head covering. Obviously, in the New Testament, we have a few other places, but just wanted to mention that. It says we removed her head covering, so it seems like you could definitely understand from this that normally she would be wearing a head covering. So their head covering is removed as a sign that she maybe stepped out from under her husband's authority and covering, so her head covering is removed. And then there's an offering brought, and from what I understand, this offering is of barley instead of wheat. So it's like a lower quality, lower on the scale. And from what I understand, it's coarsely ground instead of finely ground like most of the other offerings are, and it's kind of supposed to be representing like a lowly, humble place, showing that this woman may have committed a very low and horrible sin. And then the Kohen pronounces this curse that if this sin has been committed, that this woman's thigh would rot and her stomach would do like this pretty graphic, pretty horrible thing. And from what I understand from some of the commentaries, it sounds like pretty much instant death is what happens through this curse. So the Cohen, the priest, pronounces the curse, writes it on a Torah scroll, and then scrapes off that what's written into this cup of water. And then the woman drinks the water. If she's guilty, she dies. And if she's not guilty, then it says that she will bear seed. So it sounds like there's a little bit of a thing here that if she was even barren before, after this process, she will actually be able to conceive. So it's a very, very interesting little thing we have going on here. One of the really big things that the Jewish people bring out is that this verse that is being written on this Torah scroll is actually it actually has the name of God in it. And so God obviously has a huge puts a huge level of importance on the relationship between a man and his wife, so much so that when this is in jeopardy or may have been caused to be in a bad place, that his holy name is scraped off into this water and is drunk. So even his name is brought low in this whole thing. So it just shows how much God cares about marriage and keeping this marriage strong. So a big question here that I had when I was reading through this and I was studying some of the different commentaries and things, one of the big questions that comes up here is, it sounds like that this woman isn't actually guilty in the beginning. There's a probability, there's some reason that this husband thinks that maybe she has committed adultery, but we don't know yet. And so if we don't know that she's guilty of this of a horrible sin, it's kind of interesting that that this whole process is very humiliating, right? It seems like a pretty bad punishment, right? You're having to be brought before the Cohen, like you're brought into this court, basically. There's this water and this dirt in the water, and you're removing the head covering, and then you have to drink this water and say amen to this horrible curse. And if you had, then you like instantly die. If you had committed this sin, but even if you hadn't, it seems like a pretty horrible or a pretty humiliating process that this woman's having to go through. And I think that's something that I want to talk about a little bit, because I believe, a lot of times when I hear even young ladies or women talking about the reason why they need to be modest, or the reason why they need to behave themselves in a modest way, is because they don't want to cause their brothers to stumble or whatever. And so I want to talk about that a little bit, because I think there's a lot more to this. I think there's a reason. And as a man who, since I was a young man and a boy, have tried to be pure, I want to talk about this, even though I realize this is really a very sensitive subject. I feel like I needed to talk about it and to encourage my sisters in Messiah, and to point out a little bit of kind of what my wife and what Beck and I have talked through on this sort of thing. Because I think in some ways, I think a lot of ladies, women, don't realize how much influence they have. And that's really what I want to talk a little bit about here, is that possibly that just the fact that this woman was in a situation where she might have committed adultery means she's already committed some level of sin, and therefore she has to receive this punishment. And if she did actually commit adultery, then she is punished even further. So I see this as actually a punishment from the start. And so the very fact that this woman was in a place where she was committed some sort of action, or gave the appearance of being unfaithful to her husband, required this sort of punishment to come upon her. And so I want to talk about that a little bit more, because I think again, ladies, you don't realize how influential you are. And I think even in the seemingly small things, we have to recognize that the guys and girls communicate very well. There could be eye contact, laughing at jokes, just paying special attention to certain people, and we communicate very well. As soon as a guy and a girl have a crush or whatever you want to call it, immediately there's this eye contact. Usually it's like one of the first things that happens. They start looking at each other, and all of a sudden the girl and the guy both feel like, oh, well, hey, he's paying attention to me, she's paying attention to me, maybe she likes me. And then every time the guy says something funny, which he tries to say a lot whenever the girl's around, then she laughs, and then there's the more eye contact, and there's this very, very clear communication going on that, hey, I kind of like you, you kind of like me, and then it slowly moves further and further, and there's more and more contact until there could be the potential of immorality. So I think we need to be very honest about what we're communicating. And as Beck and I, my wife, were talking about this, we said, we really need to be able to own our influence. How does a guy influence a girl? How does a girl influence a guy? We need to own our influence, to realize that we are influencing each other, and think it through. We all know that men are visually influenced, and we know that women are very influenced by words and by actions. We know that ladies have a need for love, right? And men have a need for respect. And so that's why we have the scriptures in the New Testament talk about husbands, love your wives. This was no secret. Wives, submit to your husbands. The husband needs that respect. The wife needs that love, that treasuring, that cherishing that a husband can give, that protection. But this is kind of interesting that we have this punishment, so to speak, that we've talked about for the woman's, flirtation or whatever action it was that made her husband feel jealous, or like maybe she wasn't being faithful, and a potential adultery situation. So it's not just a lightweight thing here. I'm not saying that. Like there was a potential for adultery here. So there must have been some pretty serious things going on. But the question I had was, okay, so we have this for ladies, but what about for the guy? That seems like what's kind of missing from this whole story is what about the man who possibly committed adultery, or where's he at, or what's going on with that here? And it's kind of a big question. But along with this whole idea that I'm seeing, I think that this really shows how serious a woman's influence is. This isn't just a thought that I have. I actually have a scripture that I want to go to talk about this a little bit more. And the first place I want to go is to 2 Samuel chapter 11, where we have the story of Bathsheba. And we all know what happened. There in 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 2, it says, "It happened late one afternoon when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, 'Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?' So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness." So we know that the Torah prescribes a mikvah after a woman's time and period. So that's what's happening here. And then it says, "Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, 'I'm pregnant.'" So we know the rest of the story. David sends for Uriah to bring him home, apparently hoping to cover up his sin. Uriah refuses to go home to be with his wife while his brothers are in battle. So David sends him back out to the field, tries to think of a plan B. Then he tells Joab to put him in a bad place in the battle, and Uriah gets killed. So then King David takes Bathsheba, and they end up having a son. Nathan the prophet comes and rebukes David, and then the baby dies. So in this story, actually I want to go to the second story first before we dig into it very much more. So the second story I want to go to is 1 Samuel. I'm going to back up a little bit to 1 Samuel chapter 25. And we see here the story of Abigail and Nabal. So chapter 25 says, David sent, we'll kind of abbreviate this a little bit. So basically we have the story of David sent to Nabal to ask for food for him and his men. And Nabal responded very foolishly and said, "Hey, who's David? I don't know what you're talking about. No, I'm not going to send food." And then David said, "All right, guys, put your swords on. We're going to go and destroy Nabal and all of his house." Then someone told Abigail that David was on his way, so she prepares food and goes out to meet him. So then verse 23 is, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Oh, on me alone, my lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears, and let the words of your servant let not my lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my lord whom you sent. Now then, my lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from saving with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my lord be as Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to my lord be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord a sure house, because my lord is fighting the battles of the Lord. And evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of griefs or pangs or conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your servant." And King David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from blood guilt and from working salvation with my own hand." So, we have a few questions here. We know that David sinned in the instance with Bathsheba, and he did not with Abigail. So the question is this: did Bathsheba sin? Like, we know that David sinned, right? That's for sure. God says he was not happy with what God did. It's very clear in Scripture. We know that David did, but was there some mistake that Bathsheba did in this situation? If King David had not had Uriah killed in battle and he returned home from his house and saw that Bathsheba was pregnant, would he have had to go through this process that we just read about in the Torah? Seems like a situation that would probably apply. So, again, David's sin is obvious, but maybe Bathsheba's is not so obvious that she could have been at fault. So she was taking the mikvah in a place where King David could see her, and she did not refuse David, right? When David called her, she could have stood up and said, "Hey, David, you're a godly man. This is not something you want to do. This is wrong." Like Abigail, right? Abigail saw that David was on his way to sin, and she went down and said, "Oh, David, you're a godly man. May your enemies be scattered," all these, good things. But please don't do this sin. And David said, "Yes, you're right." And again, David was a godly man. He was wanting to follow in God's will, but he messed up, right, with Bathsheba. But Abigail was able to use her influence to help David make a good decision. He turned away from sinning because of Abigail's influence. So my encouragement, obviously, for men is to flee from sin, right? That's what David should have done in that situation. Like Joseph, right? We know his story in Potiphar's house. He fled away from sin. And my encouragement to the ladies is to take the high road and be Abigail's. Own your influence and say no in every way when a godly man is faltering. And you could possibly save him and yourself from sin. In our community, we've set up a lot of boundaries to help us stay accountable in this type of thing. We try to keep individual conversation in between men and women inside of to a minimum, and encourage group conversation. We never have a man and a woman that are unmarried in the same room. There's different things I think that we can practically set in place to where we set up a good, solid place where that's safe from these things happen. Obviously, the whole betrothal thing and modesty, body language is so powerful. We don't need to underestimate its power. All right, we're running out of time here, but I just want to encourage you guys to be strong, and God loves righteousness. Let's follow after him in righteousness. Thanks so much for listening, and Shabbat Shalom from the beautiful, exceedingly good land of Israel.